Zoom master tonight, and to Amanda Feldman, our technical guru. If you have any technical difficulties, Amanda's email is in the chat, afeldman@wrj.org. And now, standard Zoom housekeeping. Please, please, please stay on mute. Please use the chat box to send questions to the speaker. With such a large crowd, we unfortunately had to turn off the open chat function. Please remember our Yammer Advocacy Hub is a great place for follow-up conversation. Okay, sorry, hold on one second. Little Zoom issue here. Okay, so the Advocacy Hub is a great place for follow-up conversation with each other. Subtitles are available either from the More button or the Live Transcript button, depending on your system. And now it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Women of Reform Judaism Advocacy webinar, Freedom to Vote and Reproductive Rights, the Intersection and the Impact. We have an inspiring lineup of speakers. We hope you will find the program informative and empowering, giving you renewed energy and opportunities to play your part as individuals and communal leaders in the interconnected fights for voting rights and access and abortion rights and access. And for our Canadian folks, we know that while abortion rights have federal protection, abortion access is a challenge, and litigation is pending, for example, in New Brunswick, where they recently blocked funding for abortion clinics outside the hospital setting. Thank you to our incredible WRJ Freedom to Vote A-team of Julia Weinstein, Abby Fisher, and Deborah Getz, who helped conceive of and shape this program with months of careful thought and preparation. Thank you to my partners, the chairs of WRJ's Education to Action, or E2A committee, Trina Novak and Dr. Trish Joseph, and our staff partners, Elisa Heisman, Lily Heyman, and Kate Franklin. This team is indefatigable. They deserve our gratitude for the work that they are doing, not just to prepare this webinar, but also to update all of our Repro resources and our Repro guide on the WRJ website and Yammer Advocacy Hub. Now, in the abortion rights battle, our eyes right now are focused on Texas and Mississippi, but my problems happened in New York. In January of 1973, days before my 6th birthday, the Miami Dolphins were perfect and Roe v. Wade was decided. I thought winning was a given and that the illegal abortion and dirty dancing was a plot device from history. I thought wrong. At 19, I was diagnosed with endometriosis. My 20s were a blur of pain, surgeries, and medical treatments, trying to preserve my fertility to give me a shot at getting pregnant. More than a decade of treatment later, and through the magic of in vitro, we saw 2 heartbeats on the ultrasound, twins. Then the 20-week ultrasound and testing revealed that twin B's brain never split into 2 hemispheres. Twin B faced a potential horror of an existence that would last for hours or, God forbid, months. And the condition was creating an inhospitable uterine environment for the other twin too. We had to terminate twin B for both of their sakes. The medical options were clear. If they were fraternal twins, we had a choice. We could do the termination either in New York by an injection or go to Pennsylvania for riskier fetal surgery. Medically, the injection gave twin A the best survival odds. But if they were identical twins, the New York option could be fatal to both twins, and fetal surgery in Pennsylvania would be the only, albeit riskier, choice. I was already on bed rest due to other complications because that's the way I roll. So Pennsylvania was both 2 hours and 1,000,000 miles away. If the reproductive healthcare option you need isn't available in your state, abortion access can become a problem for any of us, anywhere. Medically, between the travel and the risk inherent in the procedures, the choice was clear. Genetic testing would tell us if the twins were fraternal or identical and dictate whether we could do the procedure in New York. Only if that was a no would the risk of going to Pennsylvania be worth it, but genetic testing takes a long time, and we were well into 21 weeks now. Exit the doctors and enter the lawyers. You see, the abortion clock was running out in Pennsylvania. By 24 weeks, we had to be finished with travel, doctor's visits, surgery. We were frozen in time. It was simply inhumane. Medically, the right answer was to wait for the genetic results to make the least risky decision. Legally, if we waited, the Pennsylvania fetal surgery likely would be off the table if it turned out we needed it. So no, Justice Roberts, 15 weeks isn't enough time. And sometimes 24 weeks isn't enough time either. I shut down. Having just learned that we were definitely losing one twin, how could I put the other one at higher risk by going to Pennsylvania if we did not need to? What if the travel made me lose both twins? What if we got there and then found out that we could have used the less risky choice in New York, but couldn't go back? Can you imagine having unnecessary fetal surgery? But what if we found out too late that we needed to go to Pennsylvania, but our choice and our twins were gone? More than a decade of the most advanced medical treatments to preserve my fertility, to get pregnant, to stay pregnant. And abortion laws meant we couldn't make the best medical decision. Those laws left us paralyzed. And in the end, we couldn't choose. We basically closed our eyes, stayed in New York, and prayed. We finally got confirmation that the twins were fraternal. We successfully terminated twin B by injection in New York, surrounded by every resident in the hospital watching for one heartbeat to stop and the other to keep going. 12 weeks later, I delivered both twins, one alive, the other gone. I rarely speak about my abortion. I didn't even associate the word abortion with myself for years, but I had an abortion. And I can never forget that abortion laws took away my medical choices and almost stole twin A, my son James, from me in New York and Pennsylvania, not Texas or Mississippi. None of us are immune from the impact of abortion restrictions on rights and access. We need to be vigilant everywhere and protect our voting rights to make sure we preserve our abortion rights. To provide Jewish text and context for the issues we are discussing this evening, it is my honor to introduce Rabbi Nancy Kasten of Dallas, Texas. Ordained by HUC, Rabbi Kasten is the Chief Relationship Officer for Faith Commons, a past co-convener of Faith Forward Dallas, and a longtime educator, volunteer, and activist. Her work has taken her from Hillel director to working toward Jewish-Arab coexistence. She lives the rabbinic value of knowing that even though we may not be the ones to complete the work, she never desists from being on the front line for justice. And in that vein, she is also a RAC Texas core team member on the ground in the abortion rights battle. Rabbi Kasten?
Thank you so much, Shoshana, and thank you for sharing your story with all of us. It's a powerful reminder of the impact of laws that are made in so many cases cavalierly and with assumptions about what people believe about life, about personhood, none of which really do pertain to Judaism, because from a Jewish lens, there would have been no question that you would have been able to preserve your options as long as possible. In Jewish law, in Jewish tradition, starting with the Bible itself, personhood, full personhood does not get ascribed to a fetus until it emerges from the womb. And even in some religious texts, until 30 days after removal, emergence from the womb, a baby is not considered a full formed human being. That is not to say that we treat life cavalierly before that point in Judaism. The sanctity of life is always upheld to the maximum. But there's an understanding that the saving of a soul is more complicated than preserving a zygote once a sperm and an egg have united. And that is what our faith tradition has preserved. Within Judaism, the idea of pikuach nefesh applies both to a person who is carrying a fetus, as well as to the medical provider who, if trying to save the person carrying the fetus, must sacrifice the fetus if the life of the mother or the person who is holding the fetus is in danger. And so through these laws, these restrictive abortion laws, our states and perhaps our country are taking away the options, religious options, both for persons who are having children, as well as persons caring for those having children, providing medical care for those having children. You know, the reasons for this and the connection to our voting rights in this country, are really epitomized, I thought, by a quote from a book by Valerie Kaur, who's actually a Sikh American civil rights leader. And she writes that the founders crafted the US Constitution to consolidate power for white Christian men of an elite class. The rest of us were not counted in, quote, we the people, unquote. The law was designed to colonize and control the rest of us, not set us free. And yet the founders had invoked words whose power even they could not constrain: justice, freedom, equality, the guarantee of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These were magical words that had a power of their own and seized the imagination of the people for whom they were never meant. In every generation, people had risen up in movements to unleash the magic of these words, to bleed for these words, and expand the we in we the people to include more and more of us. And I thought about the fact that the Civil Rights Act was signed in the Religious Action Center conference room. It was drafted there in 1964. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 was also drafted in the conference room of the Religious Action Center in Washington, D.C. And that is part of our Reformed Jewish tradition. In the traditional liturgy, in the morning, we recite the daily blessings, the daily miracles. And traditionally, one of the miracles is to not be created as a woman. And our tradition, our Reformed tradition, has changed that blessing to say, who has created me in God's image. And just as we reinterpret our Jewish tradition to meet the science, the reality, the social context, the cultures of the time, and we try to apply the underlying values and moral obligations, the ideals of our tradition in every generation, so too we must do the same here in the United States with our voting laws and with our Constitution. The fact that there are those who are trying to take away both voting rights and, through voting rights, freedoms of all kinds for Jews, for women, for poor people, for people of different genders and sexual identities, for people with disabilities, for everyone who doesn't fit a certain model, and really everyone. I mean, nobody is going to be able to be unaffected by the kinds of restrictions that are being placed right now on our voting rights and on other freedoms of movement, of actions, of education, of healthcare. These are things that will affect all of us. And from a Jewish point of view, and particularly from a Reformed Jewish point of view, we must fight to preserve our freedom of religion, our liberties, and our ability to vote, and for every person who is qualified in the United States to have a free and counted vote. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Rabbi. My name is Kate Franklin. I'm the Communications and Programs Associate at WRJ, and I'm really happy to present our next speaker, Desiree Luckey. Desiree Luckey is an activist and lawyer who serves as the Director of Policy at Wrj, which is the Unite for Reproductive and Gender Equity group. Their mission is to empower and sustain the young people's movement for reproductive justice. Desiree is also a co-founder and principal at the ACD Strategy Group, a progressive political consulting and DEI firm. And we are really excited to have her speak. And with that, Desiree, I hand the floor to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me this evening. My name is Desiree Luckey. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm Director of Policy at Wrj, Unite for Reproductive and Gender Equity. Thank you so much for the invitation to participate in today's discussion. And just a little bit of more background on Wrj. We're a sex-positive, gender-expansive, reproductive justice organization that's led by and for young people in the South and the Midwest, including Kansas, Ohio, Alabama, Georgia, and Texas, all states I'm sure you've heard a lot about as it relates to abortion access, as well as California. Our framework and our movement lineage is reproductive justice, which was first articulated by Black women human rights leaders in 1994. For young people and for all of us, reproductive justice means having economic, social, and political power, information, and resources to make healthy decisions about our bodies, gender expression, sexuality, and reproduction for ourselves and our families. So I was asked to speak on the state of play in this issue area right now. I don't want to sugarcoat it for everyone. It is pretty grim for us across the reproductive movement right now. 2021 was the worst year for abortion access across state legislatures in terms of the legislation that was introduced and then enacted that were bills that restricted abortion access in some way. I'm currently in DC right now, but I live in San Antonio, Texas. And here in Texas, we've had one of the most egregious laws, most restrictive bans that's been passed since Roe v. Wade came into law. It's called SB 8, Senate Bill 8. If you're not already familiar, SB 8 is essentially a 6-week abortion ban here in Texas. We've sort of talked about it as a two-prong attack on abortion access. First, it's an attack on pregnant people because it limits the amount of time that you have to find out that you are pregnant before you're able to get abortion access. So that 6 weeks is not a lot of time for most people to be able to figure out that they're even pregnant, let alone be able to make an appointment. In Texas, we have laws already creating a waiting period. So not only do you have to have a first appointment, but you have to wait at least 24 hours to be able to have a second appointment. So everything Texas does already drags out the process for people, which could easily put someone past that 6 weeks. And I do want to note, because we mentioned young people, people of lower socioeconomic background, people with disabilities, this is essentially a complete abortion ban for people under the age of 18 who aren't able to get an abortion with parental consent. The judicial bypass process right now is about a 4-week wait. So by the time you find out you're pregnant and go through judicial bypass process to access an abortion, your clock has already run out for being able to have an abortion in Texas. So after the 6 weeks, this also becomes an attack on people who want to be able to help those who want an abortion access one, because it prevents people from being able to, as the law is written, aid or abet someone in having an abortion in Texas beyond that 6-week time. So this means loved ones who support a pregnant person in accessing abortion care can be sued for doing so. Potentially folks from abortion funds, practical support funds, Uber drivers who drive you to your appointment. Because we haven't had a lawsuit yet to fully flesh out what it means to aid and abet, all bets are kind of off. We don't know what it looks like and who all could be at risk here, but that's the point of laws like this. It's to chill people's access to abortion care. It's to scare providers. It's to close clinics. It's to do everything to make abortion as inaccessible as possible. So this state law is also unique because it specifically doesn't allow state officials like district or state attorneys to go after people. It creates a private right of action that's enforced by citizens. So these are citizens enforcing this law against other citizens in their community. This is not even elected officials or government agents enforcing this, which is what made it so difficult to challenge from a legal perspective. It's already gone before the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has let it move forward in the legal process, but has not paused the law and prevented it from taking effect. So today in Texas, this law is in place, even though we know we have a constitutionally protected right to abortion access. So this is awful. I mean, this has been in effect since September 1st. And one of the things that we're seeing now as new state legislators are starting for the year is that there are copycat bills popping up all over the country. People waited to see what was going to happen with the Supreme Court to see if they were going to ban this law from taking effect. And when the Supreme Court didn't, other states decided that it's their time to go ahead and act and make similar laws. So some of our investment states include Alabama and Ohio. We've already seen copycat bills coming down in Alabama and Ohio that replicate what's happening in Texas. In Ohio, it's even more extreme. It's all out abortion ban. So states are going to push and see how far they can possibly go. And they're going to go ahead and continue circumventing normal systems of enforcement and using private citizens to harm other individuals. So all this state terror is set in the backdrop as well of what's going on a federal level. So the Supreme Court did hear the case already in SB 8, but all of this is set in the backdrop of another case, which is called Dobbs v. Jackson, which was argued in front of the Supreme Court on December 1st. Mississippi enacted a 15-week abortion ban, which again, in violation of the constitutionally protected right to abortion care prior to viability, which is about 24 weeks. So the Center for Reproductive Rights and its partners filed a case in March of 2018 on behalf of the Jackson Women's Health Organization. This is the last remaining abortion clinic in the state of Mississippi. It's the only one that they've got. And the state has continued to find ways to try to attack it and get it shut down. This ban violates, of course, Supreme Court precedent that was set down in Roe and has continued to be reinforced, although chipped away at over the years. And Mississippi appealed to the United States Supreme Court. And this is the first real direct challenge to Roe. Mississippi said, we are challenging the holding of Roe v. Wade, which is that we have this constitutionally protected right. A case like this is the reason that former President Trump packed the Supreme Court during his administration, full of justices who committed to strike down Roe if given the opportunity. So we've now seen this perfect creation of conditions to prevent us from being able to access abortion care. So if the Supreme Court overturns Roe, we're going to see legal abortion access decimated across the country. There are 24 states that are poised to significantly ban abortion, which includes all of Wrj's investment states, many states across the South and the Midwest. We're going to have huge deserts of abortion access. At least 41% of people who are able to get pregnant would see their nearest abortion provider close. People would have to drive an average of 279 miles, a minimum of about 4.5 hours to get an abortion, which is up from about 35 miles today. And in the first year alone, it's estimated that about 100,000 people would be denied their right to access abortion care. So we know this will hit hardest in marginalized communities, including the ones that we as an organization prioritize: young people, LGBTQ people, Black and Brown people, people of low income, and people who live at the intersections of all of those ideas. And as touched on earlier, even though abortion has been legal, it has already been difficult to access for many people in these communities through barriers like the Hyde Amendment, in addition to all of the different state barriers that have been created over the years. So we are fortunate that besides the bad news in most of our states, we do work in California as well. And California has committed to be a reproductive freedom state. So should Roe fall, California is putting forth lots of efforts to try to increase access to abortion care, but we know we can't rely on one state or a few states to be able to provide that for the whole country. People should not have to leave their home states and their communities to be able to access their constitutionally protected rights. I know my time is coming up and we'll get to questions, but I'd love to discuss more as we move in about some of the things we're doing at Wrj. But we also know that these issues don't exist in a silo. Abortion access and reproductive justice is directly connected to voting rights. the same people who are drafting all these restrictions on abortion access are the same ones who are doing their best to limit access to the ballot box, gerrymander themselves into power, keep that power by increasing voter suppression. So all of these things for us are interconnected. They're all restrictions on people's bodies, access, and ability to express themselves and create the lives and futures that they want to see. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Desiree. That was very informative, and it's devastating information, but it's really powerful to understand the overall issue of it so that we can work towards a solution. So we are moving into the question and answer portion of this webinar. So we have about 5 minutes for questions. So if you have any questions, please pop them into the chat box. But to get us started, we collected questions on the registration form, and the most common question or repeat question was just basically, what can I do? I think it's easy to feel a little bit helpless in these matters, especially as like one voice. So what's the best strategies to help in preserving women's reproductive rights?
Absolutely. So I think we've got a couple options, which are great for folks who are in states that are actively trying to preserve abortion access, making sure that you're volunteering with abortion funds, supporting abortion funds financially so that we can get resources directly to people who are trying to access abortion care, I think is one of the biggest things that we can possibly do. We have to make sure that providers are protected, that funds are staffed up and supported, because we know we're going to see the abortion landscape change pretty drastically. So whatever we can do to sort of bolster the systems that are in place, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of work already out there that people have been doing for years now to prepare for this, but really making sure that we're supporting those things is huge, huge step. Contacting legislators to make sure you encourage yours not to introduce any sort of copycats makes it a lot easier for me to do my job when we only have a few states where we're trying to put out these fires. So as much proactive things as we can have for people contacting their elected officials to make sure that they're not supporting or putting forward this sort of legislation. And then if you're living in a state where your legislators are actively trying to reduce your access to abortion care, really making sure to support those who are opposing that, raising awareness in your communities, again, continuing to support abortion funds. I know for me, that looks like really trying to make sure that I'm getting involved in volunteering and following up with them. They are at capacity, they are maxed out in terms of their ability to respond, but really making sure that you can reach out to show your support and volunteer as much as possible. I'm looking at something in the chat really quickly. I am not familiar with SB4 outside of the ban on medication abortion comment, so I will circle back on that and maybe I'll be able to send something out in follow-up. But the other things that I think it's really important for people to do is make sure that they're connected to the folks in their communities. I've seen a lot of people who have shared that they posted a little bit of information and it led to an influx of people in their communities reaching out to them about where they could access abortion care, because now they saw that someone was a safe person to reach out to. So as much as we want to do huge system things, which are tremendously important, also making sure we don't forget the little things that we can do. Even if it's just scheduling a tweet or a Facebook post, that might be the difference for someone. And then on a federal level, contacting your legislators to support WIPA, which I know is a part of what we're doing today, but that is also something we're pushing at Wrj in terms of our federal work to make sure that people are supporting the Women's Health Protection Act, which creates a statutory right for providers to be able to provide abortion care and for people to be able to sue their states for creating some of these restrictions that we've seen that have decimated abortion access.
Okay, Rabbi, do you have a question?
I just wanted to add that, for Jewish women, it's also very important to be telling people, your elected officials, as well as just people that you know, that within a Jewish framework, personhood does not begin at conception. Life does not begin at conception. That this is not that not everyone considers the life of a fertilized egg as being equivalent to the life of a mother, and that we as Jews are pro-lives, and that we see a life in the context of a whole life, not just what happens within the womb. And so I think that I've been surprised at how many people, elected officials or candidates for office, as well as just people that I meet, who just really don't know that this is also a freedom of religion issue.
Absolutely. And I just want to follow that to say, I think that fits so nicely too with the reproductive justice framework, that this is about all of the ways that we show up in our lives, whether it's having children, not having children, and the ability to raise our families in safe and healthy environments. So really looking at this as a multidimensional thing, not just one or the other.
Yeah, great. Thank you both. In the last 1 minute, do you want to just tell us a little bit more about Wrj or anything you specifically want to plug, Desiree?
Sure. So yes, definitely make sure we're supporting WIPA, continuing to. We're hoping to have some action on that this month, but also making sure, and I'm sure we'll get more commentary on this from our other speakers, but supporting the voting rights legislation that is also happening in the Senate right now. So really making sure that we're talking, when we talk to elected officials, when we talk to people, we're drawing that connection for them, because it's not always the most natural connection for people to see the link between reproductive rights and voting rights. And then at Wrj, we're just going to continue pushing back on the bad bills at state levels, but also really working on proactive legislation. So if you have young people in your community, please send them our Wrj's way. We have campus chapters that we work with to really support young people as reproductive justice leaders and developing them in advocacy and policy and organizing. So please feel free to send your young people our way, and we would be happy to work with them and help talk about some of these connections as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Desiree, and thank you for providing a perfect segue to our next speaker. I am happy to introduce Nse Ufot, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the new Wrj Project. She is proud to lead the organization to its goal of strengthening the state's democracy by registering, and engaging roughly 1 million eligible but unregistered African Americans, Latinos, and Asian Americans, as well as being a community organizer, an activist. We are so happy to have Nse here. And with that, I give you the floor.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening. I am so happy to be here with you all this evening. Thank you for the invitation. Yeah, voting rights. We are in, so I used to be very careful about how I talked about this moment that we were in. I used to be afraid that I would be considered hyperbolic or hysterical when I say that these attacks on our democracy and on our elections infrastructure represent an existential threat to how we govern, how we self-govern. But it's true. And not saying it doesn't make the threat go away. Trying to be creative in how we describe the attacks on our elections and on our democracy has not in any way stopped them. That we are in a moment where in 2021, we saw nearly 400 anti-voting bills introduced in 48 out of 50 states. And they passed in 19. And so while it is true that the history of democratic participation in this country has been one that has been a constant fight to expand the definition of citizen, to expand the electorate, and for every step that has we've made forward, that we've taken forward as a country, has been met often with a corresponding backlash, or to get creative, a corresponding white lash. And so to fast forward, I mean, I definitely have examples from history, but when I think even recently, we are talking about the 2020 presidential election, which was the election where we had the highest participation of citizens voting in our elections, that Americans came out in historic numbers to cast a ballot. And they came out in historic numbers, and it's particularly sort of remarkable because we are in the middle of a pandemic. And, you know, in a place like Georgia, where our governor continues to get on television and lie about what he knew, that Americans decided that it was important to cast a ballot for president. And as a result of that, you know, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris were elected, the first woman to serve as vice president, et cetera, et cetera. What was remarkable about that in our state in particular was because Georgians had not elected a Democrat since Jimmy Carter. I think that it was a multiracial, multi-ethnic, multilingual, multi-generational progressive majority in the Deep South. And what I have been arguing for quite some time is that that is actually the demographic makeup of not only the Deep South, but of our country. But that has not been reflected in the results of our elections because of voter suppression. I think that, you know, when I say voter suppression, that there are some folks who hear or who imagine Bubba on the back of a pickup truck with a shotgun trying to intimidate voters, right? And while that absolutely still occurs and did occur in 2020, that what we are actually seeing is much more sophisticated, and where Republicans, and I use that as a description because, one, the New Georgia Project is a nonpartisan organization, fiercely so, but I have to be accurate because they say you cannot fix what you have not faced. And what we are seeing throughout our country is a well-funded effort to destabilize our government and to basically destroy our elections infrastructure. And it is because in the marketplace of ideas, fewer and fewer people are buying what this current version of the Republican Party is selling. And so the way that they have been able to hold on to power in our state, in Georgia, is by passing a suite of awful laws that make it more difficult to vote. In fact, they have taken it a step further, and they are now criminalizing voting behavior. That Senate Bill 202, which was passed in Georgia in 2021, creates 5 new voting crimes. 2 of them are felonies. And you know, much has been written about the work that we do, the line warming, as it's called, where we hand out bottles of water or hot chocolate and pizza and cell phone chargers because Georgians routinely have to suffer the indignity of waiting in line for 8, 9, 10 hours to vote. That is now a crime in the state of Georgia. It is a crime to not only receive water, but to give it. And Georgia isn't the only state. This isn't just a Georgia issue. This isn't just a red state issue, that we are seeing these anti-voting bills being introduced all over the country. I'm deeply concerned about the impacts that it's going to have on the outcome of the 2022 midterm elections, because in those 19 states where Republicans have given themselves the ability to overturn the results of elections, if they don't like the outcome, it could have the ability to delay us determining who the next Congress is going to be. And so again, I used to be very careful about how I talked about these things, because I didn't want folks to, again, dismiss what I was saying, but also more importantly, I didn't want it to have the impact of, I didn't want it to be demotivational. But the truth of the matter is, and what I've been really encouraged by in this moment, is that Americans are saying no. Ordinary folks are saying no, and pushing back in real ways. I think that there is a sort of clarity in this moment that the right to vote is preservative of all of our other rights. That if you're thinking about it as a political issue, right, and our ability to elect leaders who are accountable to our communities, who will go to Washington, D.C., or go to their state capital and do the people's work, or if you're thinking about it as a domestic policy issue, right, that, Build Back Better, an extraordinary piece of legislation, doesn't have any path forward if we cannot get votes, if we can't get debates, if we have a party that has refused to govern, right? If we have a party, not a party, sitting elected officials who were a part of not only a murder plot to kill the Vice President of the United States, they also were a part of a coalition of sitting elected officials who worked to interfere with the electoral count, the Electoral College vote. They are sitting elected officials who continue misinformation and disinformation campaigns that are poisoning our information wells, that they filed nearly 50 lawsuits to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election. And they have not stopped, right? So Joe Biden came, our president, our vice president came to Atlanta, yesterday, to deliver a powerful speech on voting rights. I, for one, despite what was written about our open letter and the fact that I was not in attendance, and neither was Leader Abrams, and neither were a lot of activists and organizers on the ground in Georgia, I was happy to have our president and vice president join us. I was happy to see that voting rights has moved to the front of their agenda, and they understand the urgency of the moment that we're in right now. And what has that led to? There's going to be a vote tomorrow on the For the People Act and on the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. These are two important key pieces of legislation that will set a floor, a federal floor, for the minimum of how elections can be conducted in all of our states. And we need it, and we need it now. And so I am encouraged by the folks who refuse to shut up about what's happening in this moment, and that it is working. They often say that it is darkest before dawn, and I know that it feels like 4:30 in the morning as it relates to American democracy, but the sun will come up. Again, when the president and vice president were on their way to Atlanta on Tuesday, there was no plan to have a vote on For the People Act or Build Back or the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. There was an emergency meeting in the Senate and a vote is being held. And listen, we still need to overcome cloture. There still needs to be a rules change. There are still senators that need to be convinced that the filibuster has been a tool of oppression and is not necessary to carry out the work of the Senate. Right? And I am convinced that if we do not let up, that this will the cultural organizing, the narrative organizing, the social media posts, the donations, the turning out to vote, the registering voters, the sending postcards to voters, all of it matters. All of it has helped us create and sustain the demand for leaders who are accountable to all of us, to all of our communities. And so I don't know what the outcome of tomorrow's votes are going to be, but I know that, again, the work that we do, this multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-generational coalition of Americans fighting for our future is working. And so I will end there because I am being told that I am out of time, but I am absolutely here for questions.
Great, thank you so much. That was very informative and passionate and great. We have one question in the last remaining minute or so. Someone asked, are there any federal bills or legislators in play that address anti-voting suppression versus right to vote? Most of the legislation appears to be focused on freedom to vote. Where are the actions to fight voter suppression?
I mean, I think that those are two sides of the same coin, right? So if you if you pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, where it restores pre-clearance, right? Pre-clearance was said basically that there are several states and jurisdictions in our country that have a long history of voter suppression. And before you make any changes to your voting laws, it needs to be pre-cleared by a federal judge or by the Department of Justice. That is no longer the law of the land because it was struck out with this trash Supreme Court decision called Shelby versus Holder. And so the John Lewis Voting Rights Act seeks to put that back. Yes, it is a freedom to vote ambition, but it will slow down some of these voter suppression attempts that we are seeing in states across the country because the DOJ will have to sign off on it before they can change any of their voting laws.
Great. Thank you so much. We are going to move on to our next speaker, but we will make sure to forward along information for the new Georgia Project to everyone included in this webinar today. Thank you so much, Nse, again.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Good night, all.
Great. We are moving on to our fourth and final speaker. I am happy to introduce Fredi Bleeker Franks, who serves as the chair of Wrj Texas. She belongs to Congregation Emmanuel in Houston, Texas, where she volunteers on the Congregation Social Justice Core Team and is the congregation's treasurer. She's a longtime board member of the Women of Reform Judaism, and we are happy to have her here today. So Fredi, you have the floor.
Ooh, coming last. Okay. That, by the way, was an incredibly inspirational speaker. So many years ago, when I was president of our WRJ district, we hosted an interim board meeting at Green Family Camp, which we did every 2 years. It was a weekend filled with congeniality, new friendships, prayers, and music that filled the camp with love and joy and peace. Our WRJ guest spoke to the assembled group about important issues that WRJ was taking a stand on. And one of those issues that she raised was reproductive justice. Of course, way back then, we just called it being pro-abortion. I learned a lot that day. I learned that even topics that I thought were clearly no-brainers, like what Reformed Jewish woman would not support a woman's right to choose, even those topics were filled with fear and anger and judgment. I learned that there is no one way of thinking about important topics. And I learned that acknowledging differences while maintaining my own values and beliefs was downright difficult, but essential. That was the weekend that opened my eyes and began my journey, which eventually led me here to advocating for issues that WRJ supports and to chairing Wrj Texas. As the chair of Wrj Texas, I've focused my efforts for the last year or so on civic engagement, on making the right to vote a basic human right in my state and in the nation, but always on the edge of my vision, in that peripheral vision, was the fight for reproductive justice, particularly in the great state of Texas. Over the years, serving on the board of WRJ and as an active member of my own sisterhood, I've had the privilege of hearing brilliant and passionate speakers like we've heard tonight talking about this issue. During my years of involvement, WRJ has issued at least 5 official statements dealing with reproductive rights and many prior to my involvement. The earliest statement that I could find was issued in 1935. In partnership with the Religious Action Center, we've published resource guides and action alerts. As a Jewish woman who strongly believes in protecting our nation's democratic values, using as my basis for that my belief that we all created in the image of God, I've long looked for a way to make a difference in my community. I believe we have a responsibility to care for the sick, the poor, those that are less fortunate, and that we are commanded to respect the dignity of each person and the sanctity of life. I found my place to make that difference in my work with WRJ and Wrj Texas. Some of you know that I write Facebook posts once or twice a month on Shabbat. I write them as a record for posterity. I write them to recenter myself in hope and compassion, and I write them for my children and grandchildren. I usually end by sharing what I'm going to pray about when I close my eyes after lighting the Shabbat candles. Those things change from post to post, but there is one that's fairly constant. I pray for the women who find themselves facing the difficult prospect of ending a pregnancy and living in Texas are really unable to do so. Since our legislature passed Senate Bill 8, which, as you've heard, makes ending a pregnancy after approximately 6 weeks unlawful and provides financial incentives, private citizens are incentivized to sue, as anyone who successfully sues an abortion provider or anyone suspected of helping someone access an abortion is entitled to somewhere around $10,000 plus their legal fees. So since that bill, women in Texas have been faced with incredibly hard choices. I've said this before, the sheer hypocrisy of Senate Bill 8 is astounding. Our Texas legislators, seemingly so concerned about the life of an unborn child, have failed time and time again to expand Medicaid for our low-income families and their children. They can pass bills which makes life more difficult for trans folks, especially children and their parents, and they refuse to mandate public health and safety measures which would protect all Texans. Again, as you've heard, we had hopes that the Supreme Court would strike down Senate Bill 8, but they did not. They voted 5-4 to really uphold that legislation, which, let me remind you, is one of the most restrictive in the country. On the 24th of September, supporters of the Wrj and members of WRJ across the United States marched in support of the women of Texas, in support of free and unfettered access to abortion for all women. Wrj Texas works for the rights of all Texans, using Jewish values as our guiding principles. Jewish tradition views us as working in partnership with God to create a better world. And the Torah calls on us to pursue justice, to care for the stranger, the widow, and the orphan. That's the work of the Wrj and, of course, of Wrj Texas. Our passionate and dedicated Wrj Texas volunteers made countless phone calls, sent emails and texts, attended marches and rallies, and wrote letters to the editors of our newspapers during our Democracy Protection campaign in 2021. While we were not successful in stopping laws which we consider anti-voting, we did make a difference by letting legislators know that Wrj, Texas, representing Jews across the state, intends to make our voice heard and on these important issues, and we won't give up. Our amazing volunteers even braved meeting with Senator Cornyn. Senator Cruz refused our very gracious request to meet. So are you wondering how our democracy protection campaign relates to the state of abortion in my state? Our Wrj, Texas volunteers are determined to work to ensure that all people have equal rights and are treated with respect. Senate Bill 8 disproportionately affects our poorer citizens, and particularly our Black and brown ones. If a woman has financial resources, she can travel to a nearby state to have her procedure. Clinics in New Mexico, Louisiana, and Oklahoma report an increase in appointments because women from Texas are going across state lines to obtain an abortion. This law, however, creates nearly insurmountable obstacles for certain populations, including low-income women, teenagers who don't often recognize that they're pregnant until later in their pregnancy, women of color, and undocumented immigrants. The law passed by our legislator does not take into consideration rape, incest, or even the health of the mother or baby. So what will those women without financial resources do? We believe that all roads lead back to fair elections. The gerrymandered maps passed by Texas legislator and signed by our governor are clearly planned to break up communities of color and deny those communities what we consider basic rights: the ability to vote for an elected official who represents your community. Until we create an environment where every person's vote counts equally, laws like Senate Bill 8 and others that disproportionately affect underrepresented minorities will continue to be passed by our legislature. I hope that you will join me and the other remarkable women who shared their stories and their insights with you this evening as we work together to make our country, as one of my favorite poets, Langston Hughes, wrote in his poem about his hope for America, "Oh, let my land be a land where liberty is crowned with no false patriotic wreath, but opportunity is real and life is free. Equality is in the air we breathe." I'd now like to turn the program over to Lily Heyman, our legislative assistant at the Wrj.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Freddie, and thank you for all of your hard work and for inspiring us to also take action. So it's clear from our speakers that we are in a critical moment in history with abortion access and voting rights under attack. This moment is especially powerful because MLK Jr. Day is on Monday. The year anniversary of the insurrection was just a week ago, an attack on our democracy. And the anniversary of Roe versus Wade is on January 22nd. So this is a crucial moment in history. So this past year, like our speakers said, more than 440 laws that would restrict Americans' freedom to vote were introduced in 49 states, and 19 states have enacted 34 of these anti-voter laws. As a result, voters across the United States, especially Black, Latinx, and Native American voters, will continue to face more barriers than white voters to making their voices heard in local, state, and federal elections. This past year also brought unprecedented anti-abortion legislation, with 106 state abortion restrictions being enacted in 2021 alone, marking it as the worst year yet for abortion rights. These fall hardest on women, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, people with disabilities, and people struggling to make ends meet. There are three major pieces of legislation in the Senate right now. The Women's Health Protection Act would create federal protections against state abortion restrictions and bans protecting access to abortion. Abortion being legal is meaningless if there isn't access to abortion. We must honor the anniversary of the landmark decision of Roe by urging Congress to codify abortion rights into the law and protect access to abortion across the nation. The John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act and the Freedom to Vote Act would restore critical protections against racially discriminatory laws and move us toward a democracy that responds to the needs of the voters. However, the Senate filibuster is obstructing these critical voting rights bills from being debated and must be reformed. This Zoom is so big, and there are so many of us here. There are 141 of us here right now. If we each take these actions, our voice can be heard. Let's show the power of women of Reform Judaism. So on your screen, here are 2 actions you can take right now. And don't worry, I'll put the links in the chat. The first is calling and leaving your senators a message, urging them to support the Women's Health Protection Act. No one's in their offices right now, so you're just leaving a message. Go to the link rac.org/call-for-WIPA and input your information, your zip code, your name, etc. It will generate the phone number of your senators and give you a script and some talking points to use on the call. Remember to give your name and your zip code. They need to know that you're a constituent. It's only 2 calls. Make sure to fill out the form and indicate that you made the call so that we can, of course, keep track. Don't worry if your senator already supports the bill. That's excellent. It is important that we thank them for supporting the bill so they continue to support legislation like this. And we want to let them know that they're making the right decision and their constituents support their decision. The next action is to sign the petition to urge President Biden to help pass voting rights legislation. Go to rac.org/passfreedomtovote to sign the petition and urge Biden to lead on voting rights by using the full power of his office to compel the Senate to reform the filibuster and pass voting rights protections immediately. MLK Jr. Day is on Monday, and this is a great way to honor Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy by protecting and strengthening the sacred right to vote. We will leave the Zoom open for 10 minutes at the end of the webinar for you all to take action individually and keep each other company if you wish to stay on. You can mute yourself, turn off your sound, and make these calls while sitting together on the Zoom. Action does not stop here. We have created a one-pager with additional ways to take actions on a local and federal level, additional ways to contact Congress and urge them to protect abortion access and voting rights, and additional resources to learn more about the issues. Go to wrj.org/repro voting action to take additional actions and send it along to your friends and family. This one pager will also be included in a follow-up email, and I'll put the links in the chats as well. Thank you so much for tuning in today and taking action. It will take all of us to get our voices heard. All of us. Let's do these actions together. It should not take very long. Again, feel free to stay on the Zoom while you're taking action. We're going to go to the next slide, but we'll put this slide back up and I will put the information in the chat as well. So some things coming up before I throw it over to Shoshana. On January 20th, the Pacific District WRJ presents Abortion Rights and Access, the Pursuit of Justice Beyond Roe. It's another webinar. And on January 28th and 29th, NCJW, WRJ is partnered with NCJW with Repro Shabbat. You can sign up to host or attend an event near you. These links will also be in our one pager that we will supply as well. All right, Shoshana, I'll throw it to you before we get to taking action.
Well, thank you, Lily, and thank you to all of our speakers. And thank you to all of you for being here with us this evening and learning together about that intersection of voting rights and abortion rights. We know that some of you have to drop off the Zoom now, but before you go, here are some other upcoming, back up for 1 second, some other upcoming WRJ programs that are coming up in the next couple of weeks. And now if we can pop over to the last slide just to show everybody together, there we go. Okay, so if you can stay on with us, let's go ahead and let's make some good trouble together. We're gonna open up the chat now. We can, if everything is in the chat, if all three of these links are, we can close this slide now so people can see the full gallery of people. And please go ahead, click on the link and download our Repro and voting resource document. That's an education activity. You can also go to the WRJ website. The new Repro resource was posted just today, updated up until basically yesterday. And so that is a great resource guide as well on the Repro front. As an action, sign the petition. And for advocacy, go ahead and click on that WIPA link and follow the instructions that Lily gave you. Go through the registration page, enter your information. You'll get your personal senators, their phone numbers, and you can leave those messages. So we are here. Everyone, let's make trouble together. Good trouble.